So, Yasmeen, this has been going on for quite some time, a couple of years now. And I don't think that I know anyone, despite the fact that I also professionally follow the news, that I know anyone in this country who can actually give me a comprehensive explanation of what is going on. My sense is part of the reason for that is that at any given moment, it feels like, and particularly this week, it feels like what's going on with Brexit is constantly changing and having all sorts of maybe expected consequences and maybe unexpected consequences with the British government, the politics, etc. So give us the thumbnail where we've been up to fairly recently, I guess, in terms of Brexit, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you're certainly not alone in feeling like it's hard to kind of keep track of this story, because despite the fact, as you say, as though it feels like things are changing all the time, what's actually been kind of frustrating for reporters like me here is that for a long time, nothing has changed, consequentially, at least. We've sort of been fighting the same battle for a long time. And a lot of the changes that have been happening have to do with like things people say and new deadlines and stuff like that. But effectively where we are is that Theresa May negotiated a Brexit agreement with the European Union late last year. They agreed to it. And the battle for her up to this point has been to get enough support for it in Parliament, in the House of Commons. And thus far, she's failed to do so. She had 2 votes.
Well, before we get to the votes, Yasmeen.
Oh, sure.
Just give us the broad outlines. I mean, what does she have to negotiate with the EU to leave the EU? And what is it in the nature of the negotiations make it difficult? Because I'm not even sure that people understand that, they presume, I think people presume, and it's if we're not familiar with British politics in any real meaningful way, the presumption is, okay, we voted to leave the EU. Let's just leave the EU. What's the problem?
Right.
What is what did Theresa May negotiate with the EU? And what were the sort of the limitations on what she could give or get? And then we'll talk about why that's been such a hard sell domestically.
Sure, yeah. So basically what this whole thing has been about, these negotiations about Britain leaving the EU for the past 2 years, has been basically the terms of that withdrawal, what it looks like to leave the EU, what it looks like to untangle Britain's 46-year relationship with the largest trading body in the world. Because, being part of the European Union means so many things for British life. So it's basically, how does Britain extricate itself from the bloc? So these negotiations have covered everything from the money that Britain has committed to the European Union budget. How much money should it pay the EU to kind of cover its existing balance, so to speak? What to do with things like citizens' rights? Being part of the EU means that all Europeans living in EU countries can live and work freely across all the 28 member states. So what do you do with the people who live in Britain who aren't British, and what rights do they get to keep? And then the third and final big thing that these negotiations covered was what to do with the Irish border. Basically, what to do with the UK-EU border once the UK leaves, and once it leaves the single market and the customs union, which effectively means when there isn't free trade going across that border, which has since been invisible, what do you do with that? And how do you maintain peace on the island of Ireland? So despite it seemingly feeling like a very simple concept of Britain voted to leave, then why don't they just leave? There's actually a lot of loose ends that they need to tighten up before they do that. And that's what the last 2 years have been about.
It sort of feels like the referendum on leaving left a little bit too much up to the imagination on some level.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because I think the problem was that Brexit was always framed as a moment, when in fact it's been a process. And I think, leave and remain are such open-ended kind of ideas. And I think what we found throughout this process is that people across Parliament, across the country, have very different ideas ideas for what leaving the EU like and how Britain should leave the EU. And these last 2 years have actually been about kind of having that discussion and that debate. What's been troubling and what's kind of been the issue and sort of the downfall for this government ultimately is that they didn't have this debate before they triggered Article 50 and started the process of leaving the EU. Article 50 is the exit mechanism. So kind of starting the 2-year process. They didn't come to some sort of consensus for what they wanted out of leaving the EU and what they wanted that departure to look like. Instead, they triggered it 2 years ago on Friday and basically then scrambled to try to figure out what it is they wanted. And that's kind of why they're at the impasse that they're at now.
So to be clear, this provision 51, is it the exit provision? That is an EU bylaw, right? And so Britain triggered it and thought 2 years would be enough, and it feels like maybe it's not. Well, I mean, so what does if? And so Theresa May goes to the EU and says, it's basically working out a divorce of some sort. This is what we're going to do with the kids. This is what where I'm going to pay off these debts that we owed. But what is the leverage that the EU has to negotiate with Great Britain? I mean, I guess it's just a question of like, okay, well, I mean, if you're not going to pay us, what you had committed to paying us, we're going to make it very hard for your products to travel into Europe. I mean, good luck trading with whoever's left, essentially. I hope you have good boats or something, right? I mean, is that basically what it comes down to?
Not quite. See, I think it would be a mistake to frame it as sort of, I mean, a divorce is like an apt metaphor. It's exactly what it is. But I think both sides want it to be amicable. Because imagine if you're divorcing someone, but they're also your next door neighbor. So you're going to see them all the time. And you actually,
right.
You work together. You trade with each other. You're each other's, in this case, quite literally the largest trading partners. You have close coordination on things like security and defense. I mean, you guys are best buds and you want to stay that way. But you need to find a way to separate and have some distance. So, I think both sides have an incentive, both economically for themselves, but I mean also for each other to want this to work. And I think you even hear some of the most ardent Brexit advocates on the British side saying, look, this isn't because I hate the EU. Like we at the end of the day, they want to turn around and strike a trade deal with them. So it's in everyone's interest for these divorce proceedings to go well. And I think that's ultimately what's kind of, bound people a bit in these negotiations is that they can't afford to kind of just flip the table and walk away because it's going to come back to haunt both sides in the end when they need to figure out some sort of future relationship, not just for them, but for their citizens that live on the opposite sides of the channel, and also for Ireland and that Irish border, which both sides care about so much.
All right, Yasmeen, you've given us a very good description of, I guess, the tension that exists, both parties trying to come in, get the best deal, but also not to take advantage of each other in such a way that there is a lingering resentment. We got to take a break. When we come back, I want we'll start to discuss, I guess, the British domestic politics, because that is, at the end of the day, it seems to me the most tumultuous player or part of the equation in this instance. And I also want to talk about, broadly speaking, about the two major parties, what their, I guess, their what are the forces that are impacting what they feel they need to get out of these negotiations, and where are we on the clock? We got to take a quick break. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back with Yasmeen Serhan in just a moment.